connection between Washington politics and Hollywood celebrity is often taken for granted today, but historically speaking, it hasn't always been the case. On this episode of Recollecting Carter, I talk with Dr. Kathryn Cramer Brownell. Katie talks about her research into the origins of what she calls showbiz politics and the surprising role that President Carter played in the creation of the 24-hour news cycle.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear. The time for racial discrimination is over. That I will faithfully execute an undiminished, ever expanding American dream. The office of President of the United States.
The struggle for human rights overrides all differences of color or nation or language.
And will, to the best of my ability,
It is a crisis of confidence.
preserve, protect, and defend
To remove the blight of war, the threat of war, would be the overwhelming dream that I would have.
the Constitution of the United States.
We will not learn how to live together in peace by killing each other's children.
So help me God.
My name is Kathryn Cramer Brownell. I am an associate professor of history at Purdue University and the author of two books that look at the intersections of media and the American presidency. The first one is Showbiz Politics, Hollywood in American Political Life, which explores the rise of entertainment in American politics and the emergence of the celebrity presidency. And the second book is 24/7 Politics, Cable Television and the Fragmenting of America from Watergate to Fox News. And that explores the political debates over how to structure and use cable television.
I'm sure Carter makes an appearance in both of those books. I want to start with the first one. So, showbiz politics, it sounds like a phrase we've heard before, but what do you mean by it? Tell us a little bit about the premise, and when do you think showbiz politics really starts? Does it start in Carter's time? Is it earlier?
It's interesting that Carter's political career really embeds further what I call showbiz politics. And so he's really at the end of the book, but you can really understand how he came to prominence by understanding this emergence of showbiz politics. So what I mean by that is the active construction by candidates and elected officials and politicians, their active construction as a celebrity, that they're trying very diligently to frame themselves as a celebrity and to pursue that as a path to political power. It's a different way to think about how to win elections, how to climb the party ladder, in which media, the construction of a media-driven celebrity image, is really at the center. This is something that when I started the book, I thought was a story of Ronald Reagan, right? You know, an actor turned politician. I thought it was something that began in the 1980s. But in fact, what I found in my research is that it was a very controversial development that really begins in the 1920s as Hollywood as an industry gains global influence. And then there's this battle over how to use entertainment that's very contentious. It happens across the political spectrum. And it's really, there's a surprising figure in the book that really ingrains the importance of showbiz politics in the American presidency, the electoral process, and party politics. And that's Richard Nixon. It's not really someone we associate with the celebrity presidency, but he was obsessed with controlling his image.
Well, that's really interesting. I think if you ask the average person who was the first celebrity president, might say Kennedy, and then Nixon is often remembered for his failure to match Kennedy's celebrity. Maybe that was part of where his passion for it came. You mentioned that you were thinking maybe this started with Reagan and then found that it started much earlier. With Carter and the Reagan era coming into all of this, what is the setup? What's the milieu of celebrity politics that they're coming into?
Richard Nixon's presidency is really a transformational time, I believe, in terms of the relationship between politics, media, and popular culture. Because of the 1960 election, he was obsessed with his image. He actually tried to use Kennedy's celebrity status against him and to present an image of him as a statesman, right? That he had all of these credentials and was serious. It was a constructed image, but he tried to differentiate himself from Kennedy's celebrity style. Well, when he loses the 1960 election, he becomes obsessed again with thinking that, oh, wow, maybe the secret to my success is emulating Kennedy. And so he ingrains entertainment in really effective ways during his campaign and in his presidency. So he goes on Laugh-In, right? He has a whole celebrity apparatus of people who are willing to go out as surrogates on the campaign trail in 1972. And so there's a shift in thinking about making entertainment a priority that Nixon really ushers in. At the same time, party politics are also changing. The different reforms in the parties that are ingraining primaries, opening up the nomination process. And so what that means is that the press, media appearances really matter for candidates that have their eye on a presidential nomination. It really matters for them to try to make a name for themselves. And so George McGovern in 1972 really embraced Hollywood celebrities. He called them sparklies. And it was a way to gain media momentum and media attention free, right? And so this is really important when campaigns are struggling, when they're starting out and they're struggling to make a name for themselves, but also raise money. So it's really Carter that jumps in on this. And Carter understands this media environment. He understands this primary process. And that's part of the brilliance of his campaign is he goes to places like Iowa because he's doing that to create a very specific media narrative. He's trying to cause a splash. No one else is there. So he thinks if I can go there, win the Iowa caucuses, then all of a sudden it's going to put him on the map. And so it's a media strategy designed to show that he is this up and coming star of the Democratic Party. He partners with a lot of different celebrities and entertainers. So really builds on that strategy that Nixon experimented with and McGovern did. And it really is central to how he wins the nomination.
Yeah, he famously said that the Allman Brothers basically put us in the White House, building off of that local Georgia connection that he forged while still a governor. And that really helped to bring a lot of attention and eventually finances early in the campaign, which is always, one of my most favorite facts, I guess, about Carter. I was interested to talk a little bit more about the way that Nixon became enamored with celebrity. Obviously, the Nixon presidency ultimately failed in a major way. How do the reverberations of that and Watergate and Nixon's resignation affect Carter when he comes on the scene? We've talked previously on the podcast from kind of the journalist perspective, that journalists were really primed for scandal and were looking for scandal. Even in Carter's case, largely it wasn't there. But with this idea of celebrity and the push-pull of do we want politicians to be celebrities or not, how does that affect Carter?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Watergate affects so everything that Carter does, right? It's really central to his campaign promise that he will not lie, that he will be honest. He'll bring more transparency and accountability to American politics, kind of clean up that mess. His message about being an outsider really resonated with people in the aftermath of it. And, Watergate, again, one of the things that I think we frequently forget is that Nixon saw Watergate as a PR issue, right? He thought that he could spin his way out of it. Initially, when he's talking with his advisors about what to do, it's always about, well, we need a better narrative. If we have better PR strategies, we can get out of this. And so he was thinking about that with media in mind. So I think that Carter also has to walk this line where he's very media savvy and he's trying to create these events that generate attention, give him more control over a narrative. There's this battle with journalists who, are determined to try to find this scandal and hold people accountable that see themselves as playing this really important job as the watchdog. He's trying to have control over a narrative when the press corps is increasingly more aggressive. But also, he's trying to say that you can trust him. He won't lie to you. So I think it's this really interesting line that he's constantly walking. And that is, the consequence of Watergate. And I think that's really the challenge that presidents in the aftermath of Nixon have had to navigate, is that they know what works. They're convinced that there's a certain media strategy that's entertainment driven that gives them more control, makes them more accessible, brings out their human connection with voters. But they also have to be wary that they don't look like they're spinning too much.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think with Carter, the term often used was an uncelebrity appeal. But I think that that's a really interesting perspective that you have, that it's appearing like you don't care about celebrity to actually increase your celebrity appeal in some ways. So let's talk a little bit more about your second book. Where does Carter fit in that narrative of the 24/7 news cycle that we have today? It certainly wasn't fully in effect in the 70s during the Carter era, but does he play a role in that?
He does. And this is, again, something that was really surprising to me. His administration is very influential in the development of cable television. He's coming into office after Nixon. That legacy of Watergate is very much at play with cable television. There's this Office of Telecommunications Policy that emerges under Nixon, and cable is taken on as a way that's part of Nixon's broader obsession with the media landscape, that he actually sees policy as a way to advance his ideas as well, to have more control over his image, but also to attack the people that he sees as enemies. And he sees the television networks as enemies and as biased and out to get him. So he uses policy. And he sees cable television, which previously had been very highly regulated, to only expand the reach of broadcasting and not to compete against it. There were a lot of specific regulations about what markets it could be in and what content it could offer so that it wouldn't compete against broadcasting. But under Nixon, he sees this as a way to really hit the pocketbooks of the network. If he could promote cable television as a competitor, as an alternative to broadcasting. And so Nixon really starts this campaign. He actually calls it Project Break Up Networks, to deregulate cable television and to foster it as a medium that would compete against network television. And so cable becomes kind of politicized because it's kind of brought up in Nixon's broader war against the press. There are so many economists who are in the Nixon and then especially the Ford administration that are saying that this is actually good for the economy to deregulate. So Carter inherits this kind of controversial policy issues. And his goal is to take the more politicized framing of cable as the way to attack enemies and focus more on the economic issues. He brings in more economists as well to study the issue. And his FCC chairman, Charlie Ferris, agrees with him about the importance of deregulating cable. And so Carter frequently is not remembered as a great deregulator. That's something that people associate with Reagan. But in many different industries, his administration was really central to the deregulation of these industries, and cable was absolutely part of that.
There's an interesting Georgia connection here with Carter and an emerging 24/7 news cycle. Tell us a little bit about that.
Carter actually has these great relationships with the cable television industry. And a key factor in this is Ted Turner, who's also, sets up TBS in 1976 in Georgia, but then during Carter's presidency has the idea for CNN and this idea of a 24/7 news cable channel. He actually invites Carter to be his first guest. So when CNN launches, it includes an interview, a half-hour interview with President Carter. The correspondence in the Carter Library are really fascinating because his media team is urging him to do that. They remind him that this relationship with Ted Turner is really valuable. But in that correspondence, they also highlight, remember, CNN and something that is 24/7 can help solve the problems with the broadcast landscape that is so limited and so exclusionary in terms of whose perspectives are presented and how they're presented. A news program that's only 30 minutes, which was dominant in the 1970s, didn't really give people like Carter a lot of leeway to explain, provide more context, and again, more control over the narrative. And so it's really interesting to see CNN emerge as a way to forge a better relationship between this cable industry, which again is looking for a legislation that will take off some of the regulatory shackles, and the American presidency. And they're trying to show them, Turner is directly trying to show Carter that cable can serve his interests, that a 24/7 news cycle is going to be beneficial to the political establishment like him.
All of this really paints a picture of Carter as a lot more savvy, a lot more competent than I think he's widely remembered, at least for his presidency today. Is there anything else that you think we remember wrongly about Carter, or as historians like you go into the archives and peel back the layers and we start to look at what actually happened? How do you think our collective memory of Carter is going to change?
I think it's exactly what you mentioned, that he has a very thoroughly analyzed policy team that are trying to grapple with the legacy of Nixon, the suspicion, the concern about corruption that Nixon kind of really ingrains in American politics more broadly. So they're trying to grapple with that, but they're also thinking seriously about some of the policies that Nixon initiated. They study and they see merit in them. And so they're trying to say, let's focus on this policy angle and get the Nixonian legacy out. So he's cleaning up a lot of the Nixonian legacy, even as he's ingraining some of the media strategies and tactics that Nixon and his team felt were really effective, and also some of the policies that they saw as beneficial to economic development.
Well, thanks so much for a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Recollecting Carter is produced by me, Jason Lee Guthrie, with support from Georgia Humanities and the Liebner Cooper Family Foundation. Original music and sound design by Joel Corey. Logo design by Whitney Matheson. Archival media provided by the Carter Center. Special thanks to my intern Michael Smith and my students at Clayton State University who have contributed to this podcast. You can connect with the show online at recollectingcarter.com.